The road to Tsuchida was narrow, barely more than a trail clawing its way through thick trees and dense undergrowth. As my jeep rattled over the bumpy dirt, the trees seemed to close in tighter, casting long shadows over the path, blocking out even the faintest hint of sunlight. This place was more than isolated. It was forgotten. I'd come on rumors. The villagers spoke of a demon, a beautiful woman who walked the edge of the forest, luring men to a ruined shrine under the cover of night. They called her the Jorōgumo, the binding bride, a monster disguised as beauty. And in the last month, 4 men had gone missing. Fathers, brothers, sons, all vanished. When I finally rolled into Tsuchida, the village looked as empty as a graveyard. A few people darted out from small ramshackle houses, but no one met my eyes. It was as if they knew what I was here for, as if my very presence confirmed their worst fears. I made my way to the local inn, an ancient building with sagging eaves and broken roof tiles, hoping to find some answers. Inside, the innkeeper, a hunched, wiry man, looked me up and down, his gaze filled with equal parts suspicion and fear. His eyes flitted to the charms and talismans around my neck. "You're here for her, aren't you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here to stop the disappearances," I replied, my voice steady. I'd been doing this long enough to know how to play it calm, but the truth was, something about this village and its shadows was already gnawing at me. "Tell me what you know." The innkeeper shook his head slowly, the lines in his face deepening as he spoke. "She's not like anything you've faced before. Men, they follow her willingly. They see her at the shrine, standing in the moonlight, and they just go to her. They're drawn to her like moths to a flame." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I'd heard of creatures that could compel their prey, but this was something else. "How does she appear? What does she look like?" He sighed, leaning closer as if afraid she might overhear. "A beauty beyond compare. Her skin pale as moonlight, her hair like silk, her eyes." His voice trailed off, haunted. "Those who see her are lost, and those who try to find her." He let out a hollow chuckle. "They're never seen again." I nodded, taking in his words. "Where do I find this shrine?" The innkeeper hesitated, his gaze shifting to the floor. "Head north, through the village and into the forest. You'll see it just as the trees start to thin. But heed my warning, stranger. The shrine's cursed. It's where she feeds." I thanked him, though the look in his eyes told me he didn't believe I'd make it back. By the time I left the inn, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like claws across the ground. I could feel the eyes of the villagers on me as I made my way out of town, toward the northern edge where the forest waited, dark and silent. The path through the trees was almost a tunnel, branches interlocking overhead to block out what little light remained. The air grew thick and cold, the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filling my lungs. It was the kind of silence that wrapped around you, pressing close until you felt every heartbeat, every shaky breath. Then I saw it, the shrine. It was small, barely more than a ruined altar of crumbling stone, overgrown with thick silken webs that glinted faintly in the fading light. Candles, unlit and half-melted, were scattered around the base, alongside a few wilted offerings of flowers and fruit. Everything looked old, abandoned, except for the webs, fresh and glistening, stretched between the shrine and the trees. I knelt down, examining one of the silken strands. It was thicker than any spider's web, almost sticky to the touch, like a trap designed for something larger than flies. I stood, senses on high alert, and that's when I felt it, a presence behind me, soft and subtle, like the brush of a whisper against my neck. I turned, hand reaching instinctively for my dagger, and froze. She was there, a woman, standing just at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadows. Her skin was luminous, almost ethereal, glowing softly in the dimness. Dark hair cascaded down her shoulders, flowing like water, and her lips were curved in a gentle, inviting smile. She was beautiful, hauntingly so, but there was something else, a flicker in her eyes, something dark and hungry hiding just beneath the surface. Lost stranger? Her voice was like silk, soft and smooth, wrapping around my senses and tugging me forward. I took a step before I even realized I'd moved, my body responding to her words as if drawn by an invisible thread. Not lost, I managed, my voice rough, hoarse, looking for answers. She tilted her head, studying me with a faint smile, her eyes gleaming. And what answers do you seek in a place like this? My grip tightened on the dagger, but I kept my voice steady. Men have gone missing. They followed a woman, someone who lured them away. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen again. Her smile widened, a hint of teeth showing, sharp and white. And you think you can stop me? Something in her voice sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed it aside, meeting her gaze. I've stopped worse. She laughed then, a soft, lilting sound that filled the clearing, resonating off the trees, bouncing back like an echo. Oh, Hunter, she murmured, her voice dripping with amusement. You have no idea what you're dealing with. As the last words left her lips, her form shifted, a subtle yet horrifying change that twisted her face, stretching her smile just a little too wide, her eyes glinting with something dark and inhuman. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I forced myself to stay rooted. She moved closer, a gliding, unnatural grace, her hands trailing through the air, fingers long and delicate, almost like claws. Perhaps I'll keep you for myself, she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath as she reached out, fingers brushing against my cheek. Her skin was cold, so cold it burned, and I felt my pulse hammering beneath her touch, a response as primal as fear itself. But then she was gone, slipping back into the shadows as easily as she'd appeared. Her laughter lingered in the air, a haunting melody that echoed through the trees, wrapping around me like the webs that hung from the branches. I stumbled back, breath ragged, heart racing as I struggled to shake the lingering haze from my mind. She'd come and gone like a phantom, leaving only her scent in the air, a sickly sweet perfume mixed with the smell of rot. I glanced at the shrine, its cold, empty stone, a reminder of her presence, of what she was capable of. I hadn't seen her true form, not yet. But I knew one thing. Whatever she was, whatever horrors lay beneath that beautiful mask, I was only scratching the surface. The hunt had begun, and I was walking straight into her web. The second night came swiftly, the sun swallowed up by thick clouds that left the village cloaked in shadow. I'd barely managed to sleep, my dreams twisted into visions of dark webs and piercing eyes that watched from beyond the trees. But I was no stranger to fear. I let it churn inside me, fueling the anger and focus I'd need for tonight. I'd returned to the shrine prepared, a silver dagger at my belt, a pouch of salt tied around my wrist, and a vial of holy oil snug against my chest. If the Jorōgumo wanted me in her web, she was going to regret the invitation. The path to the shrine seemed darker tonight, as if the trees themselves were closing in, eager to hide her lair from any prying eyes. The quiet was thick, pressing down on me until every step felt like it echoed through the silence, announcing my arrival. I was walking into her trap, but I didn't care. I wanted her to know I was here. As I approached the clearing, the stench hit me first. A rank, nauseating reek of rotting flesh mixed with something metallic, something alive. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe through it, and moved forward. The shrine loomed before me, but something was different. The webs I'd seen the night before had multiplied, covering the trees and ground, glistening in the faint moonlight like ghostly silk. They were thick, layered, almost pulsing, and at their center, cocooned like grotesque forgotten offerings, were bodies. I swallowed hard, feeling my stomach twist. The bodies were men, at least they used to be. They were wrapped tight in layers of web, their faces barely visible through the translucent silk, mouths frozen open in silent screams. Eyes stared empty and hollow, yet alive with an unspoken terror. They weren't dead, not yet. One of them, his face covered in sweat and grime, managed a weak rasp as I approached. "Help, help me." I knelt down, reaching out with the dagger to slice through the webs. But as soon as I touched them, the entire web vibrated, a faint tremor that seemed to echo through the clearing. I froze, glancing around, knowing I'd triggered something. A trap. Her trap. Before I could react, a shadow moved behind me, faster than anything I'd ever seen. She was there, her form half hidden in the darkness, her once beautiful face twisted into a hideous mask. Her eyes gleamed with malice, her mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of glistening, needle-sharp teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. She lunged, and I barely had time to raise my dagger before her claws slashed down, tearing through my arm, ripping skin and muscle with a sickening, wet sound. Pain exploded up my arm, but I gritted my teeth, slashing back, catching her across the face. The blade sizzled against her skin, leaving a deep, smoking gash, but she only laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "Oh, Lucas," she sneered, her voice a mockery of the softness it had been the night before. "Did you think you could hurt me? You're mine now." She lunged again, her claws raking across my chest, slicing through flesh like butter. I staggered back, blood pouring from the wounds, my vision blurring from the pain. Her strength was inhuman, a force that seemed to pulse from her core, driving her forward with a ravenous intensity. I felt her venom, a burning sensation spreading from the cuts, numbing my limbs, slowing my movements. Desperation clawed at me as I swung wildly, catching her shoulder. She hissed, retreating for only a second before circling me, her movements slow, taunting. I could see her fully now, her transformation complete. Her body was a twisted blend of woman and spider, limbs elongated and sharp, her torso hunched and rippling with unnatural muscle. Her abdomen was bloated, segmented like a spider's, covered in a slick black sheen, pulsing with an unsettling rhythm. She was monstrous, a vision pulled straight from the darkest nightmare. With a sudden shriek, she lunged forward, pinning me to the ground, her claws digging into my shoulders, holding me down. I struggled, but her strength was overwhelming. She leaned in close, her breath hot and rancid against my face, her mouth stretched into a sickening grin. "You'll make a fine addition to my collection," she whispered, dragging her claw slowly down my cheek, drawing blood. I could feel her venom coursing through me, my limbs growing weaker, my vision blurring at the edges. But I wasn't done. Not yet. With the last bit of strength I had, I reached for the vial of holy oil, uncorking it and hurling it at her face. The oil splashed across her skin, sizzling on contact. She screeched, stumbling back, clawing at her face as smoke rose from her burning flesh. I used the distraction to roll away, clutching my chest, my blood leaving a trail as I staggered to my feet. She was writhing, the oil burning deep into her skin, but the pain only seemed to enrage her. She fixed me with a murderous glare, her eyes blazing with fury. "You will suffer for that, Hunter," she snarled, her voice thick with rage. I didn't wait for her to recover. With every ounce of strength left, I drove the dagger into one of the cocoons, slicing through the webbing to free the man trapped inside. His body was limp, barely conscious, but he was alive. I grabbed him, dragging him backward, my eyes never leaving the Jorōgumo as she stalked toward me, blood and venom dripping from her wounds, her mouth twisted into a snarl. But then she stopped. Her gaze flicked down to the holy oil spreading along the webs, where it had soaked into the ground, igniting in small, flickering flames. Her eyes widened, just for a moment, a flicker of fear breaking through her rage. I took that moment, dropping the man and grabbing a match from my pouch, striking it with a flick of my thumb. "You're not getting another soul tonight," I rasped, my voice hoarse, and tossed the match onto the webs. The flames caught instantly, racing across the silk, consuming the webs in a fierce, crackling blaze. The Jorōgumo let out a howl of fury and pain, her body twisting as the fire spread to her legs, climbing up her abdomen, licking at her skin. She thrashed, tearing at the webs, trying to free herself, but it was too late. The fire had her. I backed away, dragging the man with me as the flames consumed her, her screeches filling the air, a horrible guttural sound that echoed through the trees. Her body writhed, twisting and convulsing as the fire burned her down to her core, leaving only charred, twisted remains. Her final, agonizing scream lingered long after her body fell silent, the flames reducing her to nothing more than ash and bone. As the fire died down, I collapsed to my knees, clutching my chest, my body trembling with pain and exhaustion. I looked at the man beside me, his eyes wide and haunted, his skin pale as death. He was free, but he'd never be the same. None of us would. The Jorōgumo was dead, but her curse would haunt this village for years to come. And her final scream, that would haunt me forever. The clearing lay quiet, the flames reduced to embers, casting faint, dying shadows across the twisted remnants of the shrine. The air was thick with smoke, the stench of burned flesh still lingering like a dark omen. I could barely move. My body was a tapestry of cuts, bruises, and searing pain where her venom coursed through me, slowing my blood to a sluggish crawl. My grip on reality was slipping. The world swam in and out of focus, and every sound felt muffled, distant. But I wasn't alone. The cocooned men I'd managed to save were scattered around me, pale and silent, their eyes haunted, fixed on the scorched ground where the Jorōgumo's twisted form had finally been reduced to ash. I could feel their fear, a terror that would cling to them for the rest of their lives. They'd survived her grasp, but none of them would leave this forest whole. I forced myself to my feet, the world spinning as I staggered forward, each step a battle against the pain coursing through my veins. The holy oil I'd used to burn her was almost gone, the flames licking the last of the silk and webbing from the trees. I knew the curse was broken, that she was gone, but something lingered in the air. Her presence, like a ghostly hand, gripped my mind. That's when I saw it. Amidst the ashes and charred bones, something glinted, a small, dark object, half buried in the dirt. Her heart. I stepped closer, each movement sending jolts of pain up my spine, my fingers trembling as I reached down. It was no bigger than a walnut, but its surface was black, twisted and hardened like burnt wood, faintly pulsing with a sickly green glow. The heart was still alive, still feeding on whatever darkness had fueled her. Destroying the body hadn't been enough. This was the true root of her curse. I drew my silver dagger, fingers curling tightly around the hilt, and pressed the blade against the heart. For a moment it resisted, an almost magnetic force pushing back, and I felt a searing pain tear through my chest, like claws digging into my lungs. Her last attempt to hold on, to take one final piece of me with her, but I wouldn't let her win. With a guttural cry, I drove the dagger down, the blade slicing through the hardened flesh. The heart convulsed, twisting under the blade as if it were alive, its pulsing glow growing brighter, searing my eyes, and then, with one last shudder, it exploded in a burst of black ichor, spraying my hand and arm with thick, sticky blood that burned like acid. I staggered back, watching as the last remnants of her existence were reduced to smoldering ash. The heart was gone, destroyed, leaving nothing but the charred ground beneath it. I could feel her presence fade, the oppressive weight lifting from the air, as if the forest itself was breathing again. She was truly dead. I turned back to the men I'd saved, their faces pale and gaunt, their bodies trembling as they took in the scene before them. They'd seen the monster, had been prey to her twisted desires, and yet they were still alive. I reached out, helping them to their feet, one by one. None of us spoke. What words could capture the horror we'd just endured? The trek back to the village was long, each step a grueling reminder of the battle I'd barely survived. The men followed in silence, haunted eyes staring at the ground, too broken to ask questions. When we emerged from the forest, dawn was just breaking over the horizon, bathing the village in soft light. The villagers stood waiting, their faces a mix of hope and dread. Father Ignacio was there, his hands clasped together, his eyes widening as he took in the sight of us. "It's over?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. I nodded, though the weight of the experience hung heavy over me, pressing down on my chest like a stone. "It's over," I said, my voice rough and ragged. "The Jorōgumo won't take anyone else?" The villagers gathered around, tentative hands reaching out to touch the men, tears streaming down faces as they embraced their loved ones, lost and found. But I could still feel the monster's mark on me, a scar that ran deeper than flesh. Father Ignacio led me to the edge of the village, where the shaman waited, his eyes wise and knowing. He didn't need to ask what I'd seen. He already knew. Instead, he placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice a soft murmur as he spoke. "You carry her burden now," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "The curse will haunt you, in your dreams, in your soul, But you saved us, and that is a gift beyond measure. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The weight of it all, the bloodshed, the horror, it was too much to process. I simply nodded, accepting his words, his gratitude, though I knew they wouldn't ease the nightmares. As I walked away from Tsuchida, I glanced back one last time, the village bathed in the soft morning light, finally free from the shadow that had haunted it for so long. I knew this wasn't the last time I'd face something like this. There would be other monsters, other battles, and with every one, I'd lose another piece of myself. But for now, I was still breathing, still walking, and that would have to be enough.